Welcome back. Joining me now is Dr. Vernon Smith. Dr. Smith is a professor of economics at Chapman University School of Business and School of Law. He's the 2002 co-recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics for his work that established laboratory experiments as a tool in empirical economic analysis. Boy, that's a mouthful. We're going to talk to Dr. Smith today about the recent U.S. recession, which, not accidentally, is related to the theme of his new book, Rethinking Housing Bubbles, the role of households and bank balance sheets. Dr. Smith, welcome.
Great to be here, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Thrilled to have you here to talk about this important topic. But let's start off for our viewers in Texas here. You won the Nobel Prize for your work in creating experimental economics.
Yes.
What is experimental economics? Do you experiment on economies? How does this work?
Well, I started out primarily doing experiments in markets. And my first appointment was at Purdue University. And I was teaching principles of economics. And I realized that there was nothing in my education that enabled me to understand the connection between economic theory, supply and demand theory, theory of markets, and what people actually do in markets, the decisions they make day by day. So I decided that at the beginning of the next semester, I would when I was teaching principles, I would start out, and with the first class, I would do an experiment. And they would not yet contaminated by economic theory. They didn't know any economics. They would be completely naive. And so I created there were buyers and sellers. And by assigning values to the buyers, costs to the sellers, with the understanding that they would earn the difference, the buyers would earn the difference between the value I gave them and the price they pay in the market. And the sellers would earn the difference between the price at which they sold and their lowest price willingness to sell, which we call the cost. And so that's exactly like we imagine people in markets. You see, why do you pay $100 per pair of shoes? You like the shoes more than $100.
Yeah.
So how much more? Well, people are vague about that. Now, if you go to an auction market, a so-called English or buyer's bid market, what happens? The prices start out low, and there's lots and lots of bidders. The prices rise, and people drop out, and there's only one left, and the item is awarded to that person. That tells you right away the law of demand, that people have maximum amounts they're willing to pay that they discover, they find out. So we just created that in this the classroom. And I had them just shout out bids and asks, and they traded. And then I repeated it Monday, Tuesday. You imagine a daily markets. These would last about 5 minutes. Prices converged to the competitive equilibrium, the intersection of the supply and demand. And I was astonished. You have to remember that my mother was a socialist and had a Harvard education. I wasn't prepared to see markets work that well. So I thought, well, I keep trying this. Maybe it was an accident. Turned out, no matter what the configurations of supply and demand, they would find the equilibrium, and they had no idea what it was they were finding.
Right.
They had no idea that they were not leaving money on the table.
So basically, you found with students who are completely ignorant of economics, ignorant of everything except their own cost or their own value, let them swap, and they found their way to exactly what economists would say is...
And Ben, it changed my life.
Wow.
I never saw economics in the same way, and I stayed with experimental economics. That first experiment was done in January 1956. My first paper was published on that topic in the Journal of Political Economy in 1962. 63, I taught the first seminar in experimental economics at Purdue, and of course people didn't even know what experimental economics was. And it's just been a blast, my career.
And an amazing career doing this.
Yes.
So you have a book coming out on housing bubbles now.
Yes.
And you actually, this is your prior book here, Rationality and Economics.
But here's the thing, Ben. I started following, I should say, I believed then, from the 60s clear up into about 1982, 83, I had the idea, the misperception that all markets worked as effectively as those.
Okay.
Then, starting in 82, 83, Arlington Williams and I, a graduate student, we thought, well, no one's done any experiments with asset trading, where you can buy and resell an asset, and the asset yields some sort of utility, like a dividend. But let's see if we can design some experiments. We'll start with a real simple, transparent environment that they'll trade at fundamental value, and then we'll see if we can create bubbles. That was our idea. We started with an environment where people had complete information, and we reminded them each period what the fundamental value was. They paid no attention to that.
They still created bubbles sometimes.
We got bubbles. And so the question became not how do you create bubbles, but how do you make them go away?
Or the things that make bubbles more likely.
More money.
So if you inject money into it, you get more bubbles.
If I take two groups here with exactly the same parameters, except this group I give more cash relative to the value of shares in that system, and this less cash relative to the value of shares, this group will give me a larger bubble. Okay? And you can replicate that experiment. Bring people back a second time and let them trade in the same environment. The bubble it's still there, but it's not quite as big, and it doesn't have as much volume. Bring them back a third time, and they finally get it. They don't get there by thinking about it. They get there by experience.
Right. The market's a discovery process, and they're having to grope their way through this.
So what I learned, I realized that there's a really big difference between these two kinds of markets. What I didn't fully realize until I started following the Great Recession.
The Great Recession, this most recent contraction we've had.
Yes. I started doing and started to work on that and the whole question of housing bubbles. I realized that in the national income accounts, there is one category of output that's extremely stable. It's called non-durable consumer goods. And moreover, it's big. It's by far the largest.
This is the stuff we buy in our daily lives.
It's hamburgers, it's haircuts. When you buy a ticket on an airline, when you rent a hotel room, you are buying something that perishes when you consume it, and you can't retrade it. And I realized, it struck me, wait a minute. Of course, all of those original experiments I did, those were perishables. And then as soon as you can retrade something and it lasts, you got trouble, instability. So what I say now is, if you take GDP, and subtract government expenditures.
So the private sector of the economy.
That's the total private product. Non-durable consumer goods are 75% of that. But most of the instability in the economy comes from the other 25. You never have a problem with that 75. It really behaves itself. Markets work unbelievably well.
So our latest Great Recession, then, you're going to attribute to the housing bubble that occurred in that market?
In particular, housing, what was kind of, people generally know that, who've been through this, because they followed the newspapers.
Well, it seems like that, but it's bizarre to me that everybody seems to appreciate that there was a housing bubble, but then the government keeps trying to prop up the housing and related industries.
Oh, well, people are recognized that the problem was too much stimulus of housing. So what's the solution? More stimulus of housing.
Yeah.
So what the problem became the solution. And it can't be right.
So what do you think a better solution is?
Well, I think the major mistake, major error we made was what is popularly known as the too big to fail. You see, the large banks, the largest behemoth banks, were bailed out by action of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. What they did, as soon as housing values started to fall, all kinds of people found themselves in homes that were worth less than what you could get for the home. I'm sorry, they owed on their home more than what they could get for their home. So a large number of homes were in what we call negative equity. Their assets were below what they owed. The banks are on the other side of that. So they're basically have a negative equity problem too. And when banks are like that, they don't lend. They hunker down, just as households hunker down to don't spend. You try to reduce debt. And it's very important in that process that banks that are in negative equity go through a bankruptcy and failure process. Now, we did that with over 400 banks, small to medium-sized banks. They didn't get a lot of publicity, but a lot of regional and smaller banks, and they're often the ones that are in commercial real estate.
So it's the community banks.
Yes.
Did a better restructuring.
They went through and were restructured. They came out whole, much more ready to lend because their balance sheets were cleaned up. And that's very important in a capitalist system.
So, a lot of people, when they hear bankruptcy, though, they think of it, personally, if someone goes through bankruptcy, it's traumatic and it's got to just be bad for the economy. But, we had too many resources go into housing and mortgage lending, other related industries. We don't have to burn the houses or shoot the people who went to the wrong places, right? It's a reallocation process.
Those houses just have to be priced, the price falls until they clear the market and people start to, and we've had a fair amount of that, About a third of the homes recently, in the last couple of 3 years, people are paying cash for them.
Yeah, so really the recipe here is not reflating this bubble, but it's painful. We went through it, but we have to reallocate asset titles, and then we can go forward and hopefully grow more rapidly.
Well, there's no solution that's not painful. If you want to avoid the pain, you've got to avoid that situation in the first place, because once you're there, there's no simple and easy way out. And an important part of the process is that incumbent investors who have lost money, they made their bets and they lost, they take their hit. And then that gives that system a chance to be jump-started into a new growth.
Well, thank you for visiting with us today. You've heard it here. It's unfortunate when we get into one of these bubbles, but there's no easy way out. We need the markets process to clear up these bad investments and let us go forward. Thank you for joining us.
Okay.